The metallic clink of a simple gold band hitting the dusty counter of the general store cut through the humid afternoon air like a gunshot. And Sarah Foster knew that sound would haunt her for the rest of her days. She stood there in Rock Springs, Wyoming, the summer heat of 1878 pressing down on her shoulders like the weight of every decision that had brought her to this moment. Her fingers trembled as she pulled them away from the ring, from the last physical reminder of Thomas, from 3 years of marriage that had ended 6 months ago in a mining accident that left her with nothing but debts and memories. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Mr. Henderson with spectacles that constantly slid down his sweating nose, picked up the ring with surprising delicacy for his thick fingers. He held it up to the light streaming through the window, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many desperate souls trading away their treasures. Sarah watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs, praying he would not lowball her too much. She needed at least enough to pay this month's rent and buy flour, salt, and maybe some beans if fortune smiled upon her. "It is a fine piece," Mr. Henderson said slowly, turning the ring between his fingers. "Simple, but the gold is good quality. I can give you $20 for it." $20. Sarah's breath caught. It was less than Thomas had paid for it, but more than she had hoped for in her darkest estimations. It would keep her housed for another month, maybe 2 if she was careful. It would buy food. It would buy time to find work, though jobs for widows in Rock Springs were as scarce as rain in August. "I will take it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Mr. Henderson nodded and began counting out bills from his cash box when the door opened behind Sarah, bringing with it a gust of hot wind and the jingle of spurs. She did not turn around, too focused on watching the money being laid out on the counter, each bill a small lifeline in an ocean of uncertainty. "Afternoon, Henderson," a deep voice said, smooth as aged whiskey but with an edge of something harder underneath. "Need to stock up on supplies. Heading out to the northern ranges tomorrow." "Mr. Irwin," Henderson said with considerably more warmth than he had shown Sarah. "Good to see you. Just finishing up with Mrs. Foster here, then I will be right with you." Sarah finally glanced over her shoulder. The man standing a respectful distance behind her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty brown shirt. He had removed his hat upon entering, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes were a striking shade of blue-green that reminded her of the river in springtime. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with the weathered tan of someone who spent his life under the open sky. There was a kindness in his face, she thought, despite the hard set of his jaw and the gun that rested easy on his hip. "Take your time," the man, Mr. Irwin, said. His gaze flicked to Sarah for just a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, though she could not name it. She turned back to the counter quickly, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Henderson pushed the money across to her. $20, Mrs. Foster. I hope it helps." Sarah gathered the bills with hands that wanted to shake. She should leave now, should walk out with her head high and not look back, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. This was it. The final tie to Thomas, sold for survival. She had sold their furniture already, most of their possessions. The little house she rented was nearly bare except for a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. This ring had been the last thing she had kept, the last thing she had told herself she would never part with. "Madam," Henderson's voice was gentle. "Is there anything else you need today?" "No," Sarah managed. "Thank you." She turned to leave, tucking the money into her worn reticule, and nearly collided with Mr. Irwin. He stepped aside quickly, his reflexes sharp. "Pardon me, madam," he said, and there was that voice again, courteous and careful. "It was my fault," Sarah murmured, not meeting his eyes, and hurried past him toward the door. The sun hit her face like a slap as she stepped outside, and she had to pause on the wooden sidewalk to catch her breath. The street was busy with the usual afternoon traffic of Rock Springs, miners and railroad workers, and the occasional cowboy mixing with Chinese laborers and the respectable townspeople. The town had grown rapidly with the coal mining boom and the Union Pacific Railroad running through it, and sometimes Sarah felt swallowed up by all the people, lost in a sea of strangers. She had grown up in Illinois, the daughter of a schoolteacher, and she had met Thomas when he passed through her small town with dreams of making his fortune out west. He had been charming and optimistic, with a laugh that could light up a room, and she had fallen hard and fast. They married after 3 months of courtship, and she had followed him to Wyoming with stars in her eyes and hope in her heart. The reality of life in a rough mining town had been harder than she expected, but she had never regretted her choice. Thomas had loved her fiercely, and she him. Until the cave-in. Until the day the foreman had come to her door with his hat in his hands and sorrow in his eyes. Until her whole world had collapsed like that mine shaft, burying everything she had known under tons of rock and earth. Sarah blinked away the burning in her eyes and started walking toward the boarding house where she rented her small room on the 2nd floor. She had already given up the little house she and Thomas had shared, unable to afford it after his death. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Patterson, a stern-faced widow herself who had little sympathy but at least kept the place clean. Sarah shared a washroom with 3 other women and took her meals in the common dining room when she could afford to pay for them. More often than not, she made do with whatever she could prepare on the small stove in her room. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she walked, and she was grateful when she finally reached the shade of the boarding house's narrow porch. She climbed the stairs to her room, unlocked the door with the key she kept on a string around her neck, and stepped into the stifling heat of the small space. The single window faced west, and by this time of day, the room was like an oven. She set her reticule on the table and sank into one of the chairs, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she had just done. The money would help, but it would not last forever. She had been trying for months to find work. She had applied to be a seamstress, a laundress, even a cleaning woman, but Rock Springs had more desperate people than jobs. The mine owners' wives had their own servants brought from back east. The saloons only wanted young, pretty girls for bar girls or worse, and the hotels and restaurants were fully staffed. She had offered to work as a schoolteacher, but the town already had one, and he was not planning to retire anytime soon. Sarah pulled the bills from her reticule and counted them again. $20. She mentally divided it up. Rent was $8 a month, flour and beans maybe $3, kerosene for the lamp, soap, thread to mend her clothes. If she was very, very careful, she might stretch it to 6 weeks. And then what? She refused to consider the options that some women in her position took. She had her dignity, even if she had little else. But dignity would not put food in her belly or a roof over her head. A knock at the door startled her from her dark thoughts. She quickly tucked the money into her pocket and stood, smoothing down her faded calico dress. "Yes, Mrs. Foster." It was Mrs. Patterson's voice, clipped and businesslike. "You have a visitor downstairs." A visitor? Sarah's heart leapt absurdly. Perhaps someone had a job offer. Perhaps one of the mine owners' wives needed help after all. She opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson standing there with her usual disapproving expression. The landlady was a woman in her 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Who is it?" Sarah asked. A man. A cowboy looks like, says he needs to speak with you. I told him it was not proper, but he insisted. I put him in the front parlor, but I will be watching Mrs. Foster. I run a respectable establishment. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew no cowboys. Could it be about Thomas, some final debt she had not heard of? I will be right down. She checked her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. She looked tired, she thought, older than her 24 years. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, with little wisps escaping around her face. Her green eyes, which Thomas had always said reminded him of spring grass, looked dull with worry. Her dress was clean but showed its age, the color faded from too many washings. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them and headed downstairs. The parlor was a small room off the main hall, furnished with a worn settee and 2 chairs that did not match. The cowboy from the general store stood by the window, his hat in his hands, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the cramped feminine space. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and she saw that same shift in his expression she had noticed before, a softening around his eyes. "Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unusual." "Mr. Irwin, is it?" Sarah remained near the doorway, very aware of Mrs. Patterson hovering just outside in the hall. "What can I do for you?" He hesitated, and she saw him turn his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his otherwise confident bearing. "I hope you will not think me too forward, madam, but I could not help overhearing your business at the general store earlier. I want you to know, I was not eavesdropping intentionally. I just happened to arrive when I did." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The embarrassment of having a stranger witness her selling her wedding ring was almost unbearable. "I see. Is there something you needed, Mr. Irwin?" "Please call me Samuel. Samuel Irwin." He took a breath, as if steeling himself. "Mrs. Foster, I realize we do not know each other, and I am likely stepping way out of line here, but I bought something from Henderson after you left, and I would like to give it to you." Confusion washed over her. "I do not understand." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. Even before he opened his hand, Sarah knew what it was. The gold caught the late afternoon light streaming through the window, and her wedding ring gleamed in his palm. "You bought my ring." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, madam." Samuel's eyes met hers, and she saw nothing but earnestness there. "I could see what it cost you to part with it. I thought maybe you should have it back." "I do not understand," Sarah repeated, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "That is true," Samuel acknowledged, "but I know what it is like to lose something precious. And I know that sometimes people have to make hard choices just to survive. This ring obviously means a lot to you. It should not be lost just because times are hard." Sarah stared at the ring, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. "Mr. Irwin, Samuel, that is very kind, but I cannot accept this. I sold it because I needed the money. Taking it back would be like taking charity, and I cannot do that." "It is not charity," Samuel said firmly. "Look at it this way. I bought the ring fair and square from Henderson. It is mine to do with as I please, and what would please me is to see it back where it belongs." "But you paid $20 for it," Sarah protested. "That is not a small amount." "No, but I can afford it. I have been working steady for years, saving up." He took a step closer to her, his expression sincere. "Mrs. Foster, I am not trying to buy your gratitude or put you in my debt. I just thought maybe this one thing I could set right in a world that seems pretty determined to be hard on folks. Please, let me do this." Sarah looked from the ring to Samuel's face and back again. Every practical bone in her body told her to refuse, to maintain her pride and dignity. But another part of her, the part that still ached with Thomas's loss, yearned to have that ring back, to have that one small piece of him returned to her. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Samuel said simply. He held the ring out toward her. "Say you will take it back." Sarah reached out slowly, her hand trembling. Her fingers brushed his palm as she picked up the ring, and she felt a jolt of something unexpected at the contact, a warmth that spread up her arm. She looked down at the ring in her hand, at the smooth gold band that had encircled her finger for 3 years. It felt impossibly heavy and impossibly light all at once. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Samuel. This means more than I can say." Samuel smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and more open. "You are welcome, Mrs. Foster, truly." Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, and it settled there like it had never left. She touched it with her other hand, turning it slightly, feeling the familiar weight and shape. When she looked up at Samuel again, tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Please call me Sarah," she said. "Sarah." He said her name carefully, like he was tasting it. "That is a good name." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat loudly from the hallway, a pointed reminder that this meeting had gone on long enough for propriety's sake. Samuel took the hint and stepped back, putting a more appropriate distance between himself and Sarah. "I should let you go," he said. "I just wanted to return that to you." "Wait," Sarah said, wiping at her eyes. "You said you are heading to the northern ranges tomorrow. Are you a rancher?" "Cow hand," Samuel corrected. "I work for the Rocking Eye Ranch about 30 miles north of here. We have been down in Rock Springs for a couple weeks helping drive some cattle to the rail yards, but the job is done now. Time to head back to the ranch. Will you be back in Rock Springs?" The question was out before Sarah could stop it, and she felt her cheeks flush again. What did it matter to her when or if this stranger came back to town? But Samuel did not seem to find the question odd. "Oh, sure. We come down every couple months for supplies and such. The ranch does a lot of business with the merchants here." "I see." Sarah did not know what else to say. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken but palpable. "Well," Samuel said finally, settling his hat back on his head, "I best be getting along. I am glad I could help, Sarah, truly." "Thank you again," Sarah said. "I will never forget your kindness." Samuel nodded and walked past her toward the front door. Sarah followed him into the hallway and watched as he let himself out. Through the window beside the door, she could see him walk down the porch steps and disappear down the street, his spurs jingling with each step. Only when he was completely out of sight did she realize she was still holding her breath. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said from behind her, making Sarah jump. "That was certainly irregular. A strange man coming here to give you jewelry. I hope you know what kind of message that might send." "It was not like that," Sarah said, turning to face her landlady. "He was simply returning something I had lost." Mrs. Patterson sniffed, clearly unconvinced. "In my day, proper young women did not accept gifts from men they did not know, but I suppose times are different now. Just remember, Mrs. Foster, I will not have anything improper going on under my roof." "There is nothing improper, Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said firmly. "I assure you." She climbed the stairs back to her room, her heart still beating too fast. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, looking down at the ring on her finger. Samuel Irwin had spent $20, a significant sum, just to return this to her. Why? He did not know her. He gained nothing from the gesture except the loss of $20. Unless he was the kind of man who simply did what was right because it was right. Unless he was the kind of man who saw someone hurting and wanted to help. Unless he was, quite simply, a good man. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the dusty street below. Somewhere out there in this rough, hard town was a cowboy who had just given her back a piece of her heart. And despite everything, despite her grief and her struggles and her uncertain future, she felt a small flutter of something she had not felt in a long time: hope. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bed, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The ring felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once on her finger. She had grown used to its absence these past hours, and now its presence seemed to pulse with meaning. She thought about Thomas, about their too short time together, about how much she still missed him. But she also thought about Samuel Irwin, about his kind eyes and the gentle way he had handed her the ring, about the fact that he had understood what it meant without her having to explain. The next morning, Sarah woke early and used some of her precious water to wash thoroughly. She put on her best dress, which was not saying much, but at least it was a darker blue that hid stains better and still fit her properly. She had lost weight in the month since Thomas died, not from intention but from lack of funds for food. She did her hair more carefully than usual, pinning it up neatly and making sure no strands escaped. Then she took a deep breath and headed out into the morning. Rock Springs was already bustling despite the early hour. Miners heading to their shifts, railroad workers gathering at the yards, merchants opening their shops. Sarah had a plan, born in the sleepless hours of the night. She would use part of the money to buy fabric and thread, and she would make things to sell. Handkerchiefs, simple shirts, maybe even quilts if she could afford enough fabric. It would not make her rich, but it might keep her afloat long enough to find something more stable. She was heading toward the general store when she heard shouting from the direction of the livery stable. A crowd was gathering, and Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She hurried over to see what the commotion was about. Two men were arguing loudly in front of the stable, and Sarah recognized one of them as Jack Sullivan, a ranch foreman known for his quick temper and heavy fists. The other man was Chinese, one of the railroad workers, and he was holding the reins of a horse while Sullivan advanced on him threateningly. "I told you, you worthless coolie, that is my horse," Sullivan was shouting. "Let go of it before I beat you into the dirt." "This not your horse," the Chinese man said, his English accented but clear. "This horse Mr. Chen's. He have paper." "I do not care about any paper," Sullivan snarled. "That is my horse, stolen from my ranch 3 weeks ago. I would recognize that star on her forehead anywhere." A small crowd had gathered to watch, but no one was intervening. Sarah saw the fear in the Chinese man's eyes, saw how his hands trembled on the reins even as he stood his ground. She knew she should stay out of it. A lone widow woman had no business getting involved in a dispute between men, especially when one of them was as dangerous as Jack Sullivan. But something in her would not let her just stand by. "Mr. Sullivan," she called out, pushing through the crowd, "perhaps we could settle this calmly. If there are papers of ownership, surely that would clear up the confusion." Sullivan turned on her with a sneer. "This is none of your business, widow. Get back to your sewing or whatever it is you do." Sarah flinched at the contempt in his voice but stood her ground. "If there is a question of ownership, the sheriff should be involved. That is all I am saying." "The sheriff does not care about chinks and their problems," Sullivan said. "Now get out of my way before I move you myself. You will do no such thing." The voice rang out clear and firm, and Sarah turned to see Samuel Irwin striding through the crowd. He had a bedroll over his shoulder and saddlebags in his hand, clearly preparing to leave town as he had said. But now he set his gear down and walked straight up to Sullivan, placing himself between the foreman and the Chinese man. "Samuel Irwin," Sullivan said, his tone changing to something more cautious. "I heard you were in town. This does not concern you." "Seems like it does now," Samuel said calmly. I heard you threatening this man and insulting Mrs. Foster here. That makes it my concern." "Mrs. Foster should mind her own business," Sullivan muttered. "Maybe so, but she is right. If there is a question about the horse, the sheriff should sort it out." "Unless you are afraid of what he might find." Sullivan's face reddened. "I am not afraid of anything. That horse is mine, stolen from my ranch. I do not need the sheriff to tell me what I already know." "Then you will not mind going to his office and filing a proper complaint," Samuel said. His voice remained level, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested casually near his gun. "Come on, Sullivan. Let's do this right." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other and Sarah held her breath. Sullivan was larger than Samuel, with the thick build of a brawler, but something in Samuel's steady gaze made the foreman back down. "This is not worth my time," Sullivan finally spat. "But you watch yourself, Irwin. And you, Cooley, if I catch you on my land, there will be hell to pay." He turned and stormed off, shoving through the crowd. Samuel watched him go, then turned to the Chinese man. "Are you all right?" The man nodded, still gripping the reins tightly. "Thank you, sir. You very kind. This Mr. Chen's horse, I have paper." He pulled a folded document from his shirt pocket, showing it to Samuel. Samuel glanced at it and nodded. "Looks legitimate to me. You should probably keep that somewhere safe, though, and maybe avoid Sullivan if you can." "I will, thank you again." The man bowed slightly and led the horse away, disappearing into the stable. The crowd began to disperse, the excitement over. Samuel turned to Sarah, and she saw concern in his eyes. "Are you all right? Sullivan can be nasty when he is riled up." "I am fine," Sarah said, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I probably should have stayed out of it, but it just seemed so unfair." "You did the right thing," Samuel said firmly. "It took courage to speak up like that. Most people would have just walked away." "You could have just walked away too," Sarah pointed out. "But you did not." Samuel shrugged. "Like you said, it was not fair. I do not hold with bullying, especially when it is someone bigger picking on someone smaller." He paused, then added, "I thought you would be gone by now, heading to your ranch." "I am leaving shortly," Samuel said. "Just had to settle up with the livery for boarding my horse while I was in town. Lucky I was still here, I suppose." "Very lucky," Sarah agreed. She felt suddenly awkward, unsure what to say. "Well, I should let you go. I am sure you have a long ride ahead." "Sarah," Samuel said, and the way he said her name made her look up at him. "Would you be willing to walk with me a bit, just to the edge of town?" "I know it is forward of me to ask, but I would like to talk to you for a few minutes before I leave." Sarah knew she should say no. She knew what Mrs. Patterson would think, what the other women at the boarding house would whisper. But when she looked into Samuel's earnest face, she found herself nodding. "I would like that." They walked together through the bustling streets, Samuel leading his horse by the reins. The morning sun was already hot, promising another scorching day. Sarah was acutely aware of the looks they were getting, a respectable widow walking with a cowboy, but she kept her head high. "I have been thinking about you," Samuel said as they walked. "Wondering if you are all right, if you have enough to get by on." "I am managing," Sarah said, which was not entirely a lie. "The money from the ring will help." "But not for long," Samuel said. It was not a question. "Sarah, forgive me if this is too personal, but what will you do when it runs out? Do you have family you can go to?" "My parents died when I was young," Sarah said quietly. "I was raised by my aunt in Illinois, but she passed 2 years ago. Thomas was my family, and now he is gone too." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry. That must be terribly lonely." "It is," Sarah admitted. She had not said that out loud to anyone before. "But I will figure something out. I always do." They had reached the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. Samuel stopped and turned to face her. "Sarah, I have a proposition for you. Please hear me out before you say no." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had heard propositions before from men in town, and none of them had been respectable. "Go on." "The Rocking I Ranch where I work. They are always looking for help with cooking and cleaning and such. The bunkhouse cook quit last month, and the men have been taking turns trying to feed themselves, which mostly means they have been eating burned stew and hard biscuits. The ranch owner, Mr. Irwin, he is my uncle, has been trying to hire someone but has not had much luck. Most women do not want to live way out on a ranch away from town." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am," Samuel said. "It would be honest work, and it pays $30 a month plus room and board. You would have your own small cabin, nothing fancy but clean and private. The work would be hard, cooking for a dozen ranch hands and keeping the bunkhouse clean, but I think you could handle it. $30 a month, room and board." Sarah's mind reeled. It was more money than she had seen in months, and it would solve all her immediate problems. But it would also mean leaving Rock Springs, leaving what little she knew for an uncertain situation on a remote ranch. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "First the ring, now offering me a job." "You do not know me at all." "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know you are brave enough to stand up to Jack Sullivan. I know you are proud enough to sell your most precious possession rather than beg for help. I know you are kind, because I saw the way you looked at that Chinese man, like you truly cared what happened to him. Those are the qualities of someone I would like to have on the ranch." "But your uncle, Mr. Irwin, he has not even met me," Sarah protested. "How do you know he would agree to hire me?" Samuel smiled. "Because I know my uncle and he trusts my judgment. If I tell him you are a good worker and a decent person, that will be enough for him. Besides, he is desperate. The men are ready to mutiny if they have to eat Jack Thompson's cooking one more week." Sarah looked out at the prairie, at the endless expanse of grass rolling toward distant mountains. It would be a leap of faith, trusting a man she had known for less than a day. But what other choice did she have? Stay in Rock Springs and slowly starve? Wait for her money to run out and be forced into work she could not bear to contemplate? "Can I think about it?" she asked. "This is a big decision." "Of course," Samuel said, "but I need to head out soon. The ranch is expecting me back. If you decide you want the job, you could come out on the supply wagon next week. Henderson sends one up every couple of weeks with provisions. I will talk to him, make sure he knows to bring you if you decide to come." "All right," Sarah said. "I will think about it and let Mr. Henderson know." Samuel nodded, seeming satisfied. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle like he was born there. Looking down at her, he touched the brim of his hat. "Whatever you decide, Sarah, I hope things work out for you. You deserve better than what this town has given you." "Thank you, Samuel," Sarah said, "for everything. You have been kinder to me than you had any reason to be." "Maybe kindness does not need a reason," Samuel said. Then, with a click of his tongue, he urged his horse forward. Sarah watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape, until he was just a speck on the horizon. She walked back to town slowly, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. A job on a ranch, working for Samuel's uncle, living in a cabin on the prairie. It sounded almost like a dream, too good to be true. But what if it was real? What if this was her chance to start over, to build something new from the ruins of her old life? By the time she reached the boarding house, Sarah had made her decision. She would go. She would take this leap of faith and see where it led. The worst that could happen was that it did not work out and she would be back where she started. But maybe, just maybe, it would be the beginning of something good. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah informed Mrs. Patterson that she would be leaving at the end of the month, which earned her a sniff of disapproval and a lecture about the dangers of young women living without proper supervision. She ignored it. She went to the general store and told Mr. Henderson about the job offer, and the shopkeeper nodded approvingly. "Samuel Irwin is a good man," Henderson said. "His uncle, too. The Rocking Eye is a solid outfit. You will be treated fair there." "When is the next supply wagon going out?" Sarah asked. 3 days, Henderson said. "Tuesday morning. Can you be ready by then?" "I will be ready," Sarah promised. She spent the remaining days preparing. She mended all her clothes, washed everything she owned, and packed her few belongings into the single trunk Thomas had bought for their journey west. She said quiet goodbyes to the few people in Rock Springs she had come to know. Women from the church she sometimes attended when she could spare the coins for the collection plate, the clerk at the post office, the librarian who had let her borrow books even when she could not afford the lending fee. On Monday night, Sarah lay awake in her room for the last time, listening to the sounds of the town through her window. Somewhere a piano played in a saloon and men's voices raised in song. A dog barked. A train whistle blew, long and mournful. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned together, the children they had hoped to have, the home they had dreamed of building. All of that was gone now, buried with him in the Rock Springs Cemetery on the hill overlooking town. But Sarah was still here, still alive, and life demanded that she keep moving forward. She touched the ring on her finger, drawing strength from it. Thomas would have wanted her to survive, to find a way to be happy again. And Samuel Irwin, with his unexpected kindness, had given her a chance to do just that. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah was ready long before the supply wagon arrived, her trunk already downstairs in the hallway. She had paid Mrs. Patterson everything she owed and had even managed to give the landlady a small bonus for her trouble. Mrs. Patterson had accepted it with her usual sour expression, but had surprised Sarah by saying, "You take care of yourself out there, Mrs. Foster. The world is hard on women alone." "I will," Sarah had promised. The supply wagon was driven by a grizzled old man named Pete, who had apparently been making the run to the Rocking Eye Ranch for years. He helped Sarah load her trunk into the back of the wagon, among the sacks of flour and beans and crates of supplies. "Comfortable enough for you, madam?" Pete asked as Sarah settled onto the bench seat beside him. "It is fine, thank you," Sarah said. Her heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was really happening. She was leaving Rock Springs, leaving everything familiar, for an unknown future on a remote ranch. Pete clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched into motion. Sarah looked back once at the town that had been her home for the past 3 years. It had given her joy and sorrow in equal measure, had been the setting for her brief marriage and her long widowhood. Now she was leaving it behind, and she was surprised to find she felt no regret, only a sense of anticipation. The journey to the Rocking Eye Ranch took most of the day. Pete was not much of a talker, which suited Sarah fine. She was content to watch the landscape roll by, to feel the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. The prairie seemed to go on forever, broken only by occasional clusters of cattle or the distant line of mountains. It was beautiful in a stark, harsh way, and Sarah found herself falling in love with the vastness of it. They stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Pete had brought, simple sandwiches and apples. Sarah walked around a bit, stretching her legs, and wondered what Thomas would have thought of all this. He had always loved the open spaces of the West, the sense of freedom and possibility. She thought he would have approved of her decision. By late afternoon, they crested a rise and Pete pointed ahead. "There she is, the Rocking Eye." Sarah looked and saw buildings clustered in a valley below, surrounded by corrals and pastures. There was a main house, larger than the others, built of logs with a wide porch. Several smaller structures dotted the area, including what looked like a bunkhouse, a barn, and various sheds. Horses grazed in the pastures, and she could see cattle in the distance. As they drew closer, Sarah saw men moving about, doing the endless work that ranching required. A few looked up as the wagon approached, curiosity evident on their weathered faces. Pete drove straight to the main house and pulled the horses to a stop. "I will get Mr. Irwin," Pete said, climbing down from the wagon. Sarah waited nervously, smoothing down her dress and checking her hair. A moment later, a man emerged from the house, and Sarah knew immediately that this was Samuel's uncle. He had the same broad-shouldered build, though he was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a sun-weathered face. But he had kind eyes like Samuel, and when he smiled at her, she felt some of her nervousness ease. "Mrs. Foster, I presume," he said, walking over to help her down from the wagon. "I am Robert Irwin. Welcome to the Rocking Eye." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Irwin," Sarah said. "I hope I can be of service." "If you are half as good as Samuel says, you will be a godsend," Robert said warmly. "Come, let me show you to your cabin, and then we can discuss the particulars of the job." Pete and one of the ranch hands carried Sarah's trunk while Robert led her across the compound to a small log cabin set slightly apart from the other buildings. It was simple but well built, with a single room that held a bed, a table and chairs, a stove, and some shelves. There was even a small window with real glass in it. "It is not much," Robert said, "but it is clean and private. You will take your meals in the main house with me and my wife, Martha. The bunkhouse has its own dining area where you will serve the men's meals. We will provide everything you need for cooking, and if there is anything else you require, just let me know." "It is perfect," Sarah said honestly. Compared to her cramped room at the boarding house, this cabin felt spacious and welcoming. "When would you like me to start?" "How about tomorrow morning?" Robert suggested. "That will give you time to settle in today. Breakfast is at 5, and I will introduce you to the men then. Fair warning, they are a rough bunch, but they are good workers and they will treat you with respect or answer to me." "I understand," Sarah said. Robert nodded and headed for the door, then paused. "Mrs. Foster, Sarah, I want you to know that Samuel spoke very highly of you. He is a good judge of character, my nephew, and I trust his word. I think you will do just fine here." "Thank you, Mr. Irwin. I will do my best not to disappoint you." After Robert left, Sarah stood in the middle of her new home and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. It was hers, this small cabin on this remote ranch. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe freely. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her dresses on the pegs provided, arranging her few personal items on the shelves. She made up the bed with the sheets and quilts she had brought, smoothing out every wrinkle. As evening fell, there was a knock at her door. Sarah opened it to find a plump woman in her 40s with a kind face and flower on her apron. "I am Martha Irwin," the woman said. "Robert's wife. I thought you might be hungry after your long journey. I brought you some supper." "Thank you so much," Sarah said, accepting the basket Martha handed her. The smell of fresh bread and roasted chicken made her mouth water. "I also wanted to welcome you properly," Martha said. "It will be nice to have another woman around here. Gets lonely sometimes with just all these men." "I can imagine," Sarah said. "I am grateful for the opportunity to work here." "We are grateful to have you," Martha said. "Samuel told us you are a widow. That must have been very hard for you." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Martha reached out and squeezed her hand. "You will find your footing again, dear. It takes time, but you will. And in the meantime, you have a home here with us." That night, Sarah ate Martha's delicious food and then sat on the edge of her bed, looking around her cabin by the light of her oil lamp. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the desperation of selling her ring to the kindness of a stranger to this new beginning. She touched the ring on her finger, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to be all right. The next morning, Sarah was up well before dawn. She dressed in her most practical dress and her oldest apron, pinned her hair up securely, and made her way to the main house in the pre-dawn darkness. Martha was already in the kitchen, and she showed Sarah where everything was kept, the routine of meals, the preferences of the men. "They are not picky," Martha said. "Just feed them well and plenty and they will love you forever. Coffee is the most important thing. Make it strong." Sarah set to work helping prepare breakfast. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and pot after pot of strong coffee. As 5 o'clock approached, she could hear the men stirring in the bunkhouse, voices calling back and forth, boots on wooden floors. Robert came into the kitchen. "Ready. I will introduce you." Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. She followed Robert out to the bunkhouse dining area, carrying platters of food. The men were gathering around the long table and the conversation stopped when they saw her. "Men," Robert said in his commanding voice. "This is Mrs. Sarah Foster. She is our new cook and will be keeping the bunkhouse in order. You will treat her with respect and courtesy at all times. Anyone who does not will find themselves looking for work elsewhere. Understood?" There was a chorus of "Yes, sir," from the men. Sarah set the platters down and the men waited until she stepped back before they reached for the food. She poured coffee, moving around the table, very aware of the eyes following her movements. "Madam," one of the younger cowboys said, "this is the best breakfast I have had in months. Thank you." "You are welcome," Sarah said, and she saw several of the men smile. Over the next few days, Sarah fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning the bunkhouse and preparing lunch, her afternoons cooking dinner and doing laundry, and her evenings in blessed exhaustion. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Rock Springs, but it was also satisfying. The men were appreciative, and she could see the difference her efforts were making. She had not seen Samuel. She knew he was out on the range, doing whatever cowboys did with cattle and horses. Sometimes she caught herself looking toward the distant pastures, wondering if that figure on horseback might be him. But the ranch was large, and the men often spent days away from the main compound. It was her second Sunday at the ranch when Samuel finally rode in. Sarah was sitting on the porch of her cabin, enjoying a rare afternoon of rest, when she saw him approaching. Her heart did an unexpected flip in her chest, and she stood up, smoothing down her dress. Samuel dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, then walked over with that easy, confident stride of his. He was dusty from the trail, his face shadowed with several days' worth of beard, but his smile was bright. "Sarah," he said, "I heard you made it here safely. How are you settling in?" "Very well," Sarah said. "Your uncle and aunt have been wonderful and the work is good." "The men cannot stop talking about your cooking," Samuel said. "I think you have won them over completely. Jack Thompson is especially grateful. He hated being the cook." "I am glad I could help," Sarah said. She felt suddenly shy, unsure what to say to this man who had changed her life so dramatically. "Listen," Samuel said, "I know it is your day off, but I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride. I could show you some of the ranch, let you see the land. It is beautiful out here, especially in the evening." Sarah hesitated. It would not be proper, riding alone with a man, but then again, she was already living on a ranch full of men, already breaking so many of the rules she had been raised to follow, and she wanted to go. She wanted to spend time with Samuel, to talk to him, to know him better. "I would like that," she said, "but I do not have a riding skirt." "You can ride in that dress if you are careful," Samuel said. "I will get you a gentle horse." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself on horseback for the first time in years, following Samuel out onto the open prairie. He had been right about the horse being gentle, a sweet-tempered mare named Daisy who seemed content to follow Samuel's gelding at an easy pace. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Sarah drank in the beauty around her. The late afternoon sun painted the grass gold, and the mountains in the distance were purple and blue against the sky. Birds sang in the scattered bushes, and somewhere far off, cattle lowed. "It is beautiful," Sarah said. "I had forgotten how much I missed being out in the open like this." "You rode before?" Samuel asked. "My aunt had horses." "I learned when I was young," Sarah said, "but it has been a long time." They rode to the top of a small hill, and Samuel drew his horse to a stop. The view from there was breathtaking, the ranch spread out below them, the land rolling away in all directions. Samuel dismounted and helped Sarah down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. She felt that same jolt she had felt when he handed her the ring, a warmth that spread through her entire body. They sat on the grass, and Sarah pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. Samuel sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, far enough to be proper. "Thank you for this," Sarah said. "Not just for today, but for everything. For the ring, for the job, for giving me a chance when I had run out of options." "You do not have to keep thanking me," Samuel said. "I am just glad you are here. The ranch is better with you in it." Sarah turned to look at him. "Why did you help me, Samuel? Really? I need to understand." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the landscape. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. 5 years ago, I was in a bad way. I had been working on a ranch down in Colorado, and I got accused of stealing. I did not do it, but the foreman had it out for me, and he made it stick. I was run out of town, lost my job, lost my reputation. I rode north with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. He paused, and Sarah waited, sensing there was more. "I ended up here at the Rocking Eye. My uncle took me in, no questions asked. He gave me work, gave me a chance to prove myself. He saved my life, really. I was pretty close to giving up on everything before I found this place." Samuel turned to look at her. "So when I saw you in that general store selling your wedding ring just to survive, I saw myself 5 years ago. I saw someone who needed a hand up, not a handout. And I thought if my uncle could do that for me, maybe I could do it for someone else." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I am sorry you went through that, but I am glad you found your way here." "Me too," Samuel said. "And I am glad you found your way here too." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Sarah felt a peace she had not known since Thomas died, a sense that maybe she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Samuel fell into a pattern. He would seek her out when he came in from the range, and they would talk, sometimes for hours. He told her about his life, about growing up in Missouri, about learning to rope and ride, about the cattle drives he had been on. She told him about Illinois, about her aunt who had raised her, about meeting Thomas and falling in love, about the dreams they had shared. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. When he was gone, she caught herself thinking about him, wondering what he was doing, if he was safe. When he returned, her heart would lift in a way that made her feel both guilty and alive. One evening, about 2 months after Sarah had arrived at the ranch, Samuel invited her to go riding again. They had fallen into the habit of these rides, always properly chaperoned by the vastness of the prairie and the watchful eyes of anyone who might be looking from the ranch. But tonight, as they rode, Sarah sensed something different in Samuel's manner. He was quieter than usual, almost nervous. They stopped at their usual spot on the hilltop, and Samuel helped Sarah down from her horse. The sun was setting again, as it always did on their rides, and the sky was spectacular. "Sarah," Samuel said, and something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "I need to talk to you about something important." Her heart began to race. "All right." "I know you have only been here a couple of months," Samuel began. "And I know you are still grieving your husband. I respect that, and I do not want to disrespect his memory or rush you into anything you are not ready for." "Samuel," Sarah said softly, but he held up his hand. "Please let me finish. I have been doing a lot of thinking, and I have talked to my uncle about this. Sarah, I have feelings for you, strong feelings. When I am away from you, I think about you. When I am with you, I am happier than I have been in years. I know it is soon, and I know the circumstances are complicated, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel the way I feel." Sarah's breath caught. She had known on some level that something was growing between them. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "But Samuel, I am scared. I loved Thomas so much, and losing him nearly destroyed me. I do not know if I can risk that kind of pain again." "I cannot promise you will never hurt again," Samuel said. "Life is full of pain and loss, but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to make you happy for as long as I am able. I can promise to be faithful and true. I can promise to work hard and provide for you. And I can promise to love you, Sarah, with everything I have." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. "How can you be so sure? You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you have a good heart and a sharp mind. And I know that when I am with you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." Sarah looked into his eyes, those blue-green eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, and she knew he was telling the truth. She knew, in the deepest part of her soul, that Samuel Irwin was a good man, the kind of man she could build a life with. "I am still wearing my wedding ring," she whispered. Samuel reached out and gently took her left hand, looking down at the gold band. "I know. And I do not expect you to take it off until you are ready. I am not trying to replace Thomas or make you forget him. I am just asking for a chance to build something new with you when you are ready." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Thomas had been her first love, her childhood sweetheart, the man she had built her dreams around. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still living, still needing love and companionship. "I need time," she said finally, opening her eyes. "I need to be sure that what I am feeling is real and not just gratitude or loneliness." "Take all the time you need," Samuel said. "I am not going anywhere." The next few weeks were a period of soul-searching for Sarah. She continued her work at the ranch, but her mind was often elsewhere, wrestling with her feelings. She spent time thinking about Thomas, remembering the good times and the hard times, saying a proper goodbye in her heart. She realized that she had been holding on to her grief like a shield, using it to protect herself from having to risk her heart again. But she also could not deny what she felt when she was with Samuel. It was different from what she had felt with Thomas, less frantic and consuming, more steady and sure. With Thomas, she had been a girl in love with the idea of adventure. With Samuel, she was a woman who knew the cost of love and was willing to pay it anyway. One evening, as autumn began to paint the prairie in golds and reds, Sarah made her decision. She found Samuel in the barn, tending to his horse after a long day. He looked up when he heard her approach, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Sarah," he said, setting down the brush he had been using. "Is everything all right? I have been thinking," Sarah said, her heart pounding, "about what you said about us, and I have come to a decision." Samuel waited, his whole body tense. "I cannot promise that I will not still grieve sometimes for Thomas," Sarah said. "He was a big part of my life, and I will always carry him with me. But I have realized that carrying him with me does not mean I cannot move forward. It does not mean I cannot love again." She saw Samuel's expression begin to change, hope starting to win out over fear. "Samuel Irwin," Sarah continued, "I would be honored to build a life with you. If your offer still stands, I am saying yes." Samuel closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He took her hands in his grip strong but gentle. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am sure," Sarah said, and as she said it, she knew it was true. "I love you, Samuel. It is not the same as what I felt for Thomas, but it is real and it is strong and it is right." Samuel's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Sarah nodded, and Samuel bent his head to hers. Their lips met softly, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence. Sarah felt something inside her that had been frozen for so long begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I will talk to my uncle tomorrow," Samuel said. "We will do this right. I will court you properly, and when enough time has passed that it is respectable, I will ask you to marry me, if that is what you want." "It is what I want," Sarah said. "But Samuel, there is something I need to do first." She held up her left hand, looking at the wedding ring that had been returned to her by this good man. Slowly, carefully, she slipped it off her finger. It felt strange after so long to see her finger bare, but it also felt right. "I will always treasure what this ring represents," Sarah said. "But I am ready to let it go now. I am ready to move forward." "What will you do with it?" Samuel asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "I will keep it safe, put it away somewhere I can look at it when I want to remember, but I will not wear it anymore. That chapter of my life is closed." Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a simple gold band, not as fine as her wedding ring had been, but clearly chosen with care. "I bought this in Rock Springs before I left," Samuel admitted. "I was hoping, even then, that maybe someday you might let me put it on your finger. It is not much, but it is all I could afford." Sarah's eyes widened. "You have been carrying that around all this time." "I have," Samuel said. "Too presumptuous." "No," Sarah said, laughing through her tears. "It is perfect, but we should wait, like you said. We should do this properly." "Then I will hold onto it a while longer," Samuel said. "But Sarah, I want you to know I am committed to you from this moment on. Ring or no ring, proper courtship or not, my heart is yours." "And mine is yours," Sarah said. They stood together in the barn, holding hands as the last light of day faded outside. Sarah felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness. This was not the life she had planned. It was not the life she had expected. But it was good, and it was hers, and she was grateful for it. Robert and Martha were delighted when Samuel asked for permission to court Sarah officially. Martha hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "I was hoping this would happen. You are perfect for each other." The ranch hands, when they found out, were universally supportive. One of the older cowboys, a man named Jim, pulled Samuel aside and said, "You treat that woman right, you hear? She is the best thing to happen to this ranch in years." "I intend to," Samuel promised. The courtship was sweet and simple. Samuel would call on Sarah in her cabin in the evenings, always with the door left properly open. They would sit and talk for hours, getting to know each other on an even deeper level. Samuel told her about his dreams of one day having his own ranch, a small place where he could raise cattle and horses and build a real home. Sarah told him about her love of reading, how she had once dreamed of being a teacher before she married Thomas. "You could still teach," Samuel said. "Once we are married, once we get settled. There are children on the neighboring ranches who need schooling. You could start a small school." The idea took root in Sarah's mind. A school, a purpose beyond cooking and cleaning, a way to use her education and her love of learning. "I would like that," she said. As autumn turned to winter, Samuel became more and more a fixture in Sarah's daily life. He helped her carry water from the well, chopped extra wood for her stove, made sure her cabin was snug against the cold winds. In return, she mended his clothes, packed him special meals when he had to ride out on long trips, and listened with genuine interest to his stories about the cattle and the land. The other ranch hands began to tease Samuel good-naturedly about being love-struck, but he took it in stride. He was not ashamed of his feelings, and he made sure everyone knew how much he respected Sarah. Winter in Wyoming was harsh, and there were days when the snow piled so high that moving between buildings was a challenge. But Sarah found she did not mind. The cabin was cozy, the work was steady, and Samuel was there. On the rare days when the weather was too bad for him to go out on the range, he would help her in the kitchen, and they would work side by side, their movements becoming synchronized, comfortable. It was on one of those snowy days in January, about 5 months after Sarah had arrived at the ranch, that Samuel came to her cabin with a serious expression. Sarah's heart jumped. Had something happened? Was something wrong? "Sarah," Samuel said, taking off his hat and turning it in his hands in that nervous gesture she had come to recognize. "I know we said we would wait a proper amount of time before making things official, but I have been thinking and I cannot wait any longer. I need to ask you something." Sarah set down the bread dough she had been kneading and wiped her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Samuel dropped to one knee right there in her small cabin, and Sarah's breath caught. "Sarah Foster, I love you with all my heart. You have brought joy and light into my life that I never expected to find. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah looked down at this good man kneeling before her, at the hope and love shining in his eyes, and she felt her own heart overflow with emotion. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with happy tears. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." Samuel stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Sarah buried her face in his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart, and knew she had made the right choice. He pulled back and reached into his pocket, bringing out that same simple gold band he had shown her months ago. With gentle fingers, he took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Sarah looked down at the ring, at the way it gleamed in the lamplight, and felt a surge of happiness so strong it almost hurt. This was her future, symbolized in this simple circle of gold. Not a replacement for her past, but a new beginning. "When?" she asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible," Samuel said. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through every couple of months. He is due in Rock Springs in 2 weeks. If we can get there, we could be married then." 2 weeks, Sarah repeated. "That is so soon." "Too soon," Samuel looked worried. "We can wait longer if you need to." "No," Sarah said firmly. 2 weeks is perfect. I do not want to wait any longer either." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Martha helped Sarah make a new dress for the wedding, a simple but pretty design in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Robert gave Samuel time off to prepare, and the ranch hands all contributed to a fund to give the couple a proper wedding present. They would not say what it was, but they assured Samuel and Sarah it would be something useful. The journey to Rock Springs for the wedding felt surreal to Sarah. She rode in the wagon with Samuel, her new dress carefully wrapped and stored in the back. As they approached the town, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. This was where she had been so desperate, so lost. And now she was returning in triumph, with a man who loved her and a future full of promise. They were married in the small church on a cold but sunny February morning in 1879. Robert and Martha stood as witnesses, and several of the ranch hands made the journey to attend. Mr. Henderson from the general store came, as did several other townspeople who remembered Sarah and were happy to see her doing well. The circuit preacher, an elderly man with a booming voice, pronounced them man and wife. Samuel lifted Sarah's veil and kissed her gently, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was nothing like her first wedding, which had been rushed and practical. This felt sacred, like a blessing and a promise all at once. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the town's hotel. Robert had arranged for a special meal, and there was even a musician who played fiddle while people danced. Sarah danced with Samuel, his arms strong around her, and she let herself be completely happy in the moment. "I love you, Mrs. Irwin," Samuel whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I love you too," Sarah whispered back, and it was the absolute truth. That night, they stayed in a room at the hotel, their first night as husband and wife. Samuel was gentle and patient, and Sarah felt cherished in a way that made her eyes sting with grateful tears. This was so different from her first marriage, where everything had been new and exciting but also awkward and uncertain. With Samuel, it felt right, like coming home. The next morning they began the journey back to the Rocking Eye Ranch. But this time, they traveled to a different destination. The ranch hand's gift, it turned out, had been to build a small cabin for the newlyweds, a little ways from the main ranch buildings. It was not large, just 3 rooms, but it was sturdy and well made, with a good stove and a real fireplace. "It is beautiful," Sarah breathed when she saw it. Tears streamed down her face as she walked through the rooms, seeing the care that had been put into every detail. There was even furniture, simple but serviceable, and curtains on the windows. "The men worked on it in their spare time," Samuel explained. "They wanted you to have a proper home." Sarah was overcome with gratitude. She had arrived at this ranch with nothing, desperate and alone, and now she had a husband, a home, and a community that cared about her. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah still cooked for the ranch hands, but now she did it from her own kitchen, with Samuel often by her side when he was not out working. They fell into an easy domesticity, learning each other's habits and preferences, building the foundation of their life together. Spring came, bringing new life to the prairie. The cattle had calves, the horses had foals, and Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and fear. She had wanted children with Thomas, had mourned the children they would never have. Now she was being given a second chance, and she was determined to embrace it. Samuel was over the moon when she told him. He became even more protective, insisting she not work too hard, making sure she rested enough. Sarah found it both endearing and a little frustrating, but she understood it came from love. The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah was sick in the mornings and tired all the time. But she persevered, supported by Samuel's unwavering care and Martha's experienced advice. The ranch hands treated her like precious porcelain, which amused her even as she appreciated their concern. In late October, as the leaves turned gold and red, Sarah went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah was genuinely frightened. But Martha was there, steady and calm, and Samuel held her hand and whispered encouragement. And finally, after hours of struggle, their baby was born, a boy. A healthy, squalling baby boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. "Thomas," Sarah said immediately when they placed the baby in her arms. "We should name him Thomas, after my first husband." Samuel looked at her with so much love and understanding that Sarah felt tears stream down her face. "Thomas Irwin," he said. "It is a good name." Holding her son, looking at her husband, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken so much from her, but it had also given back in ways she never expected. She had lost her first love, but she had found a second. She had lost her old dreams, but new ones had grown in their place. As the years passed, Sarah and Samuel built a life rich with love and purpose. They had 2 more children, a girl they named Martha after Samuel's aunt, and another boy they named Robert. Sarah started her school, teaching the children of the neighboring ranches in a small building Samuel built for her. Samuel eventually saved enough to buy some land of his own, a small ranch adjacent to the Rocking Eye, and they slowly built their herd. Thomas grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch life. Martha was spirited and clever, always asking questions and reading any book she could get her hands on. Robert was quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for gentling horses. Sarah never forgot her first husband, never stopped being grateful for the time they had had together. But she also embraced her second chance at love, the life she built with Samuel. She kept her original wedding ring in a small box, and sometimes she would take it out and hold it, remembering. But the ring on her finger, the one Samuel had placed there, was the one that represented her present and her future. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Samuel stood on the hill where he had first proposed, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Their children were with Robert and Martha at the main ranch, giving the couple a rare evening alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Marrying me, staying here?" Sarah turned to look at her husband, at the man who had given her back her dignity, her hope, and her heart. There were lines around his eyes now, and threads of silver in his hair, but he was still the same kind, steady man who had bought her ring and changed her life. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You saved me, Samuel. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had almost given up. You gave me love and a home and a family. How could I ever regret that?" Samuel pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I am the lucky one," he said. "That day I walked into Henderson's store and saw you selling your ring. I had no idea I was seeing my future wife. But I am so glad I did." They stood together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, holding each other, surrounded by the vast beauty of the land they called home. Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from a desperate widow selling her last treasure to a woman blessed beyond measure. Life was hard in the Wild West. It demanded strength and courage and the willingness to take chances. But it also offered opportunities for reinvention, for second chances, for finding unexpected joy in the midst of hardship. Sarah had learned that lesson well. As they walked back to their cabin hand in hand, Sarah looked down at the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that represented so much more than just a marriage. It represented hope and kindness and the possibility of new beginnings. It represented a cowboy who saw a woman in need and chose to help. It represented a love that had grown slowly and surely, rooted in respect and friendship and genuine care. The widow had sold her wedding ring, and a cowboy had bought it and placed it back on her finger. But what had started as an act of charity had become something far more profound. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of compassion to change lives. Years continued to pass on the ranch. The children grew and eventually had children of their own. Thomas took over the ranch operations, proving himself to be a capable and fair-minded rancher like his father. Martha married a lawyer from Rock Springs and moved to town, but visited often with her family. Robert stayed on the ranch, taking over the horse breeding operation and gaining a reputation for raising the finest quarter horses in Wyoming. Samuel and Sarah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships, droughts, and harsh winters, the death of loved ones and the challenges that come with aging. But they faced it all together, drawing strength from each other and from the life they had built. On a warm summer evening in 1920, Samuel and Sarah sat on the porch of their cabin, now expanded and improved but still fundamentally the same home the ranch hands had built for them so many years ago. They were in their 60s now, weathered and worn but still vital, still together. "Did you ever imagine back when we met that we would end up here?" Sarah asked. "With all this?" She gestured to the thriving ranch visible from their porch, to the grandchildren playing in the yard, to the life they had created. "Honestly, no," Samuel admitted. "When I saw you in that general store, I just wanted to help. I had no idea you would become everything to me." "You gave me back more than a ring that day," Sarah said softly. "You gave me back my life, my hope. You showed me that endings can also be beginnings." Samuel reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. They sat like that, watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the next generation. The school Sarah had started grew, eventually becoming a proper schoolhouse that served the entire area. The Irwin name became synonymous with integrity and hard work, a legacy that Sarah and Samuel were proud to pass on. When Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Sarah mourned deeply, but without the desperate despair that had characterized her grief over Thomas. She had had 40 years with Samuel, 40 years of love and partnership, and building a life together. She was grateful for every moment, and while she missed him terribly, she took comfort in knowing that they had made the most of their time. Sarah lived another 5 years after Samuel's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching at the school and writing down her memories. She wanted her family to know the story of how she and Samuel had met, how a single act of kindness had changed both their lives. She wrote about being a desperate widow, about selling her wedding ring, about the handsome cowboy who bought it and gave it back. She wrote about falling in love a second time, about building a life from nothing, about the beauty and harshness of the Wyoming prairie. She wrote about loss and hope, about endings and beginnings, about the resilience of the human spirit. Sarah Foster Irwin died in her sleep in 1925, surrounded by 3 generations of family who loved her. She was buried next to Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place where he had proposed to her so many years before. On her finger, she wore the simple gold band Samuel had given her, the symbol of their enduring love. Her story lived on, passed down through generations of the Irwin family. The tale of the widow who sold her wedding ring and the cowboy who bought it and placed it back on her finger became a treasured family legend, a reminder that kindness matters, that second chances are possible, and that love can bloom even in the hardest soil. The Rocking Eye Ranch continued for generations, a testament to the life Sarah and Samuel built together. Their descendants spread across Wyoming and beyond, carrying with them the values of hard work, compassion, and resilience that their forebears had embodied. And in a small box, carefully preserved and passed down through the family, was Sarah's original wedding ring from her first marriage to Thomas. Next to it was the ring Samuel had given her, along with the story of how they met, written in Sarah's own hand. The rings represented 2 loves, 2 lives, 2 chapters of one woman's remarkable journey. They represented loss and hope, ending and beginning, the past honored and the future embraced. In the end, Sarah's story was a testament to the truth that life rarely goes according to plan. It was a reminder that our darkest moments can lead to unexpected blessings, that kindness can change lives, and that the human heart has an infinite capacity for resilience and renewal. It was a love story set against the backdrop of the Wild West, a tale of courage and compassion that proved that even in the roughest, hardest places, love can take root and flourish beyond all expectations. The sun set over the Wyoming prairie, as it had for countless years, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The land that had witnessed Sarah and Samuel's love story continued on, eternal and enduring, a silent testament to all the lives that had been lived upon it, all the stories that had unfolded beneath its vast sky. And somewhere, in the memories of a family and the legacy of a life well lived, Sarah and Samuel's love story lived on, inspiring generation after generation to believe in second chances, in the power of kindness, and in the enduring strength of love. Their story was complete, a full circle from desperate beginnings to a beautiful ending. The widow had been given a second chance at love, and she had seized it with both hands. The cowboy had followed his heart and found his soulmate. Together, they had built something lasting and true, something that would echo through time long after they were gone. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, a reminder that even in our lowest moments, redemption and joy are possible. That sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of another, better one. And that love, true love, can be found more than once in a lifetime if we are brave enough to open our hearts to it. The legacy of Sarah and Samuel Irwin lived on in the land they had nurtured, the family they had raised, the community they had served, and the love they had shared. It was a legacy written not just in deeds and property, but in the values they had lived by and passed on. Kindness, courage, hard work, and above all, love. Their story had reached its natural conclusion, every thread tied off, every question answered. From the desperate sale of a wedding ring to the building of a ranching dynasty, from a chance encounter in a general store to a love that lasted a lifetime, Sarah and Samuel had lived their story fully and well. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, a life well lived, a love well loved, and a legacy that would endure.